exactly the same trees? Well, this is why.
Oh my god. No, it isn't. The land bridge that connected the northern hemisphere, the Eurasian plate and North American plate have been connected fairly recently, and so there was a mixing of biota across it. That's why Africa, Eurasia, and North America had very, very similar animals up until humans made them go extinct. You ever wonder why there was elephants in Africa and mastodons and mammoths in North America? That's because they were connected by a land bridge, albeit way fucking far away, but they could still share populations because they were physically connected to each other, which is why there was no mammoths in Australia, because it had been cut off such a long time ago that it was just marsupials there. So once again, this is not evidence of this theory, this is evidence of plate.
Ah, you again, is it? The recusants sent a lackey. Can you believe they invited me to join them? Now, after what they did? I can scarcely believe it myself. Did they think me a fool? You might be surprised to learn I took them up on the offer. Then I only had to ask. The location of the recusant hideout. It's on Mount Gelmir, found off the old road that leads west from the town of Windmills. That's where they hide. The manor on the peak. Just you wait, wretched recusants. You'll rue the day you insulted my name by laying hands on Lanya. The tale of House Hoslo is told in blood, after all.
Well, I took you've no matter to lay out your arm.
I see that a couple of people have clicked. I just have a YouTube video on in the background, so if anybody's still watching, I am seeing that you're there. Leave comments, I will respond. Well, I have no healing potions, so I kind of just gotta wait for this to heal. A bed, at least, maybe. Maybe I can move out. I think I'm almost at the end of this place. I could just, as soon as I get to here. There. That's what I need to get to. So let's just get that done. So I can reset my potions. Or at least have a safe place to come back up to. Safe, quote unquote. Alright, well, I also don't have life for my blood slash, so... yeah, no, I'm going to... I got to, already lost one. Just gotta get out of here. Thing is small, so he's not gonna chase me very fast. Oh, 14,000. That would be, I mean, I don't really care. I think this place might have a really bad thing at the end of it, so I think I'm going to actually piece out of there. And go back to here. This one. Alright, I'm going to listen to this interview while I play, because my earballs are bored.
War II versus Japan during the prior period of Meiji Restoration.
My earballs are bored.
By the time the Japanese got into World War II, they're really prioritizing the army and the Navy too, but the military as their main instrument of national power. They are not coordinating with civilians, right? They assassinate those people. And they got into deep, dark trouble. They didn't listen to the finance minister. So yes, grand strategy is absolutely necessary. And the idea is you have national objectives. You want to increase security somewhere, you want to improve your own security. That will be your big objective. You want to improve trade. And you think about all of these different instruments of national power and how you're going to coordinate. Those who don't coordinate get into deep, dark trouble.
Right. So, but maybe having a coherent grand strategy would be ideal. But if we want to understand
what are you
history,
looking at?
You
trying to start something, mate?
Previously had Richard Rhodes,
Ah,
who wrote The Making of the
that
Atomic Bomb.
necklace what you're after, is
Talked
it?
about how after the war, the different branches of the
Well,
military were competing
show
with each
me
other to see
what it's worth to
who would
you,
get more funding
and I'll consider parting ways with it.
access to nuclear
I'm not in
weapons
love
was
with
a
it or
big part of
nothing.
that, and how many. So
You're a shrewd first.
Look, and we see lots of competition between the different parts of the government in ways that explain their
All right,
forces. For example,
things
in the case
no
of
damn
Japan,
use to
why
anyone
they
anyway.
invaded
You're
China
bloody.
instead of pursuing a maritime strategy.
Oh,
then isn't it more useful
all
to
right then. It could
just
be.
talk about the factions and the individuals rather than the
Oh.
strategy of the country?
All right, well, but it ain't my fault she's stupid enough to get duped. Anyway, lucky she ain't died on the bloody roadside,
And
I
I'll give you an
reckon.
excellent example of how the sausage is made. So I was using the Eisenhower archives a number of years ago. So here's the Allied commander from the war team, President of the United States. And what he would do is bring in all the relevant parties to whatever the decision is. He would have them recommend various courses of action, and they would differ arguments and counter-arguments, and then they would hash it out and come up with some kind of combination of all or choosing one of them. But yeah, there's going to be big debate with all kinds of different ideas. In fact, this is one of the great strengths of democracy is you have to listen to the counter-argument. Or the counter-argument is called you lose the election, and the other party is in. But the notion that you're going to streamline it and not have disagreements, that's what
It's been a long while.
do, and they
It's
have
me.
problems, they double
Patches
down
the
on that.
untethered.
Yeah,
I'm still in business, if you can believe it. Now I'm my only supplier, so I haven't got much. But everything here is top notch. Patches Emporium, now open in Raya Luca.
They didn't. I guess isn't democracy the answer for why the U.S. and Britain better coordinated their?
Part of it, and I think part of it's a different issue. You think about part of the strategic what you know, they're the conscripts of war. When think about people slightly younger than you, your age as well, if they survive to blow that front, then they come back and they start families. It's the Great Depression. It's terrible. And then when they get to the age where they're going to be strategic leaders, they have the horror of sending their own children in. And so they thought deeply about what had gone wrong in World War I. This is in the Western, particularly Britain and the United States.
By the way, she's a strange. Not that it's issuing your. You're making your way to the Erd tree. No? Well, I heard something that might help. A special means of reaching your destination. Have you ever seen an Iron Virgin? The clunky contraptions are whirlwinds of sickles and spiked wheels. But long ago, they were endowed with a spell of transposition. And get this, a surviving virgin sits at the bottom of the big water wheel in the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Its transpositional powers fully intact. So right, if you get caught in it on purpose, it'll chuck you out straight at the base of the Erd tree. So I'm told.
The U.S. had such good leadership, Patton, Curtis LeMay. There's so many great generals that came out of that time. Whereas
Cheers for that.
Germany, Hitler himself fought in World War I, so it's hard to explain why he made so many mistakes.
I think Hitler did incredibly well. I guess Blitzkrieg, incredible. It's incredible. He can't stop at the Anschluss, where he gets Austria, and then he's going to take Czechoslovakia, and then he says, I'm uniting the German people. If he quit right there, he would have gotten away with it and probably be considered a brilliant leader by Germans. But then hubris, right? The Blitzkrieg worked so well, his generals told him he couldn't do it. Of course, it didn't work, and then he goes further and overextends, etc. When you look at what you think are great generals on the Western side, they are great generals.
The thug should be resting, please. Oh, yes. That is my missing necklace. Thank you kindly. I am in your debt. Did I forget to announce myself? I am Raya, in the service of Lady Tanith of the Volcano Manor. I seek stalwart Tarnished, who might join our house. You are very brave yourself. Not only a steady hand, but a steady heart. Merciless, even to your own kind. Such strength is precisely what my mistress seeks. Please, take this. Brave Tarnished. Seek the Altus Plateau, the realm of the Erd Tree. Most Tarnished are doomed to wander the outskirts of the lands between, peering wistfully at the towering Erd Tree. But you are no ordinary Tarnished. And once that is proven, the Volcano Manor will fully extend its invitation to fight amongst a family of champions. Oh, and one more thing, only for you. This land of Liurnia is connected to the Altus Plateau by the grand lift of Dectus, beyond the high road. But the lift has been defunct for an age, meaning there's no simple means of passage. Instead, you must seek the old ruins in the cliff. At the base of the valley, near the grand lift, there's an old tunnel. It was excavated from both ends, linking Liurnia to the Altus Plateau. I have faith in you. A champion through and through. I do hope that we can meet again.
At some point, let's say he gets out of the government, and then they're just like, you know what, we'll just have Hitler have Europe. He doesn't go to war with America. Could he just have... Is it possible that there's a world in which Hitler just controls Europe?
Well, I think the problem with your question is that's not who Hitler was, right? He wrote in Mein Kampf exactly what he wanted to do, and that what you're describing is not what he's about. If you were about combining with the West and taking parts of the Soviet Union...
Well, I took you no matter to lay out your arms then.
It has this whole genocidal program that goes with him. There's another issue, is if you take too much, like if you're going to go kill off the Poles never give up. They went through 3 partitions over their history. The Polish identity never disappeared. That if you do that, it never goes away. You will never have stable borders, and then it's easy for others to fund insurgencies because you have this dominated population that hates being dominated. It's not stable.
Then you think after Blitzkrieg, suppose that before Stalingrad he had stopped, and at that point did he control like 30% of the Soviet Union?
He'll choke on his acquisitions.
Did Germany have the power under another leader to just hold that whole section of Eurasia?
All right, I'm going to flip this whole argument. So you're talking about people doing territorial conquest, right? And taking things and butchering enormous numbers of people together. So watch this in real time in Ukraine. This is how it goes. You're butchering a lot of people. You're destroying wealth at an incredibly rapid clip. You can do that. But it's really wealth destroying. Since the Industrial Revolution in the West, there has been a growing consensus that that's probably not the way to do things. We are far better crafting international institutions, international laws, treaties that we sign on to, the parts that we want to, and then we adhere to them. And then that allows us to go all over the world running our little credit card transactions. No one can use us, and you can make a lot of by doing that. And that was the conclusion, that if you look at since the Industrial Revolution, who's making all the money? People who buy into that system. And the Hitler territorial expansion is, in a way, it's a real throwback to a pre-industrial revolution way of managing your national security. This is how traditional continental empires always did it. The Industrial Revolution, with economic growth, compounding economic growth, offers a completely different alternative, which says we're going to do compounding wealth by having rules that we can all adhere to, and then we run our commercial transactions that way.
Now, why was Russia so robust against, not initially, but eventually so robust against pushing back against the Germans?
Back already, no matter.
Tens of millions of soldiers. The government doesn't collapse like the Tsars did in World War I. And not only that, but a communist country is able to produce these really advanced tanks in large and reliable numbers. There's so many mysteries there, like why central planning worked, why the government didn't collapse, despite the fact that Stalin, killed off so many of these people. He would have been hated, right? So,
but Hitler killed more. Was more hated. What you're thinking about is what did the Russians do? I'm going to flip it. What did the Germans do? A useful concept comes from the Samuel Griffith translation of Sun Tzu, which talks about death ground. What's death ground? It's when your enemy puts you on death ground, which means they're going to kill you. And therefore, you have no choice but to fight. Because if you don't fight, you're dead. And even if you fight, your odds are poor, but you still got some way to get up. The Ukrainians initially welcomed the Germans. Why? Because as friends had imposed the terrible famine of the early 1930s on them, and they couldn't imagine that anything would be worse than that until they met Nazis and then had them do their own mass graves. And the Ukrainians rethought that whole thing. And if you do this to people, you will conjure a formidable enemy. So that's what happened to Russia. You can see it happening to Ukraine now before your eyes. Go back before the invasion of Crimea in 2014. We've got Ukraine, which is a very corrupt government. And people were at sixes and sevens about whether they want to do Ukrainian things or Russian things. Okay. Fast forward to now, we have Russians blowing away the people who were most loyal to them in the eastern part of the country that was maybe their part of the country.
Wow.
And wars often do this. In the United States, we start out with our 13 colonies, and they're all very
fucking
different.
buried
After the
me.
Revolutionary War, that starts forging a national identity. And by the time you get to the end of the Civil War, where you have northern armies, at least those people have been all over the country, they have a real sense of nation by the end of that one.
It's interesting because the strategy we pursued with Germany and Japan was unconditional surrender. Now, do you think of that as different than, obviously we didn't commit genocide or anything, but do you think of that as different than the sort of total unlimited policy objectives that, for example, Germany had in Ukraine or Japan had in China? We also pursued unconditional surrender against the South.
There you are.
How do you think about it? Because that's also something
You claimed a great rule. What was your impression? My doubt. The words of the two fingers cannot be trusted. Truly, naught but rambling, senile. I believe even that's the. Oh, I have a means of it to try, and if it pleases high hope, be sure to. There's no reason to tarnish.
And possibly he thinks we're planning to, that he would get executed at the end of the war. But the Japanese people eventually figured out that they weren't on death ground. In fact, the Japanese people were so exhausted by the whole thing that the society shattered. But the United States was never going to put the German people, start massacring them in the way that the Russians massacred the Poles when they moved in. The Germans massacred the Poles. How do you want over 8 or 9 million Polish deaths in World War II? Think about that so much. It's because they're massacred. They're being massacred.
There was a firebombing of Tokyo and Dresden and Berlin. I think it was in your book that 80,000 people died that one night. Yeah. Why did that not make the fight for the sort of death round?
I don't know. Since 1931 in China, they used large armies. This is like recent U.S. wars, the counterinsurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is they're sending hundreds of thousands of troops to occupy Manchuria. The Chinese don't give up. It goes on and on and on. So by the time you get into 1945, it's a long time. Also, they had committed atrocities in China, and they knew all about it, and the atrocities get even better. When there were wounded Japanese soldiers, their commanders ordered their fellow soldiers to execute them because they didn't want cripples going home. They couldn't deal with them there. So rather than have the Allies pick them up, they executed them in place. Can you imagine how Japanese soldiers felt about this?
How do we explain the high morale, the famously high morale of the Japanese military, where they would refuse to surrender even after given orders by their superiors, despite knowing about these things that you're talking about?
It's because it's different culture. So in Japanese culture, you you belong to in-groups or out-groups. So the biggest in-group the Japanese belonged to was Japanese people and everybody else. But within Japan, you come from a province, a locality, etc. You go to school, education, various places. You belong to a job where we have, and there are various units within your job. And you owe loyalty. It's obligations. In the West, it's all about liberties. Am I right? In the East, it's about obligations to other people. And so you owe obligations to all of these organizations. And when soldiers are thinking about war, they're not thinking about great strategy, they're thinking about operational success. So the moment you as a soldier start losing a battle, instead of in the West where you can retreat, you can surrender, and it's not dishonorable because you're going to live to fight another day. In Japan, you're a failure. And therefore, if you come home back as a failed soldier, you bring dishonor to yourself, your family, your locality, anyone you are associated with. So that's why it is so difficult for them to surrender. However, by the time you get to the end of the war, they are so exhausted. Think about it. Their economy is, I don't know, I can't remember the statistics exactly. It's something like a 10th of our economy. They have something like a 13th of our, I can't remember, it's coal or steel production. And they don't have any local oil production. They're importers of food and they're not getting that food. So by the time you get to 45, they're exhausted. And it's a shattering that occurs. And finally, at the very end, you have Emperor Hirohito, who knew full well earlier, if he disagreed, he did disagree for a long time, that he would be assassinated or be proclaimed deranged, a perfectly good underage son to be used as a figurehead. He knew that he couldn't do much about it. At the very end, when he decided he was about to get nuked, that's when he intervenes to break the deadlock and at the cabinet meetings. And there are a variety of people at the very top who realize that it's over.
Could Hirohito have intervened earlier?
I doubt it.
Let's go back more than 5 years. If he intervenes when Japan is overextending in China, is there any chance that he could have succeeded?
I doubt he thought of Japan overextending in China. What expertise does he have? He likes guppies. He likes studying fish in his backyard. He has no expertise. And then, of course, there's the hubris of it all, that we're going to dominate this place. And they look at the Chinese as an absolutely feckless, backward place that's had all these warlord things going on. And it doesn't dawn on them that by their extreme brutality in China, the Chinese finally get it, going, we're not the problem, the Japanese are the problem. It is what the Japanese do that superglues China and is the great impetus to nation building. You can see parallels with Hitler doing the same thing in Russia, and also right now Putin's busy canonizing Zelensky and creating a real nation out of Ukraine that's never going to forget the ongoing events.
Yeah. Well, what I learned from your book that I thought was really interesting and also tragic because of the counterfactual was one of the strategies you suggested that Japan could have, if it's not like a continental power, it could have allied with the nationalists to beat the communists in Russia, maybe waged almost a 3-front war with Germany, the nationalists, and Japan, beat the communists and prevented the communists from taking hold in China. And given the consequences of communism in Russia and China and how many lives were saved, you know, I guess Hitler was beaten and the communists were beaten. That Japanese choice was
that means Hitler forever. And that means if you're anything but a nice Aryan, your days are numbered. Certainly, it would be have been the most ever.
Suppose the Third Reich is survived, maybe it's not lands were reconstituted. Suppose that Hitler had by that point. And I wonder if we have sort of furnished has survived. Would we see that same cycle there where the system breaks down and would we also remember the same way as the Soviet Union where it was so evil but at some point it just, you know, you just can't sustain that level
And it's what it's Nadezhda Mandelstam. She was married to the poet Osa Mandelstam, and she was talking from the prison camps and saying, well, at least it's Russians doing this, because if it were Germans, there'd be no hope. With Russians, there's always a hope because they're inefficient. And she's Russia talking about it. Hitler he's talking about annihilating entire peoples.
But so was Stalin with killing off the entire classes of Ukrainians.
Yeah, well, his idea is Ukrainians need to pretend they're Russians, and then that's fine if they do that. The question you're asking is, it's not a happy ending that you're describing. It's a horrendous ending.
What is a scenario in which both Hitler defeated in World War II? Is there some system of alliance?
No, I think the problem is World War I has enormous consequences. It is the West, in fact, all sides allowed their generals to make strategy. No one is doing grand strategy in World War I. It's all about operational successes. Then the generals keep sending people, waves and waves of young men up over the trenches. And what do you think is going to happen to them if you send them over the trenches? This is how you get these horrific death rates, hundreds of thousands in battle. In our own day, it's inconceivable. As a result of that war, not only does it upend Europe by getting rid of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, gets rid of all of those. It's a massive power vacuum. But it puts two really pernicious ideologies on steroids, fascists and communists. And that's how you get all that evil. It's out of a gross mismanagement of World War I. Once they're off and running, you've got problems on your hands. And you've got a long solution. So, back to your initial question, does grand strategy matter? Yes, it does. Look at World War I when they didn't practice it. And when the civilians, they allowed the officers to make all decisions. Britain is a country that is maritime by geography. Britain built a continental-sized army. That is not Britain's great strength in World War I. And it was the beginning, the victory in World War I, but at horrific cost was the beginning of the end of the British Empire.
Britain is the only country that fights Hitler from all the way from 1939 to 1945, whereas Stalin only fights Hitler after he himself is invaded, and in fact collaborates with him to annexate Poland. After the war, Stalin, the Russia expands beyond any that the Tsar might have, whereas the British Empire is about to collapse and territory. What explains the two countries in World War II, and why did the post-war objectives of Stalin succeed?
I think he retaining your part of the empire. Russia is a classic continental empire, but it's continuous.
Right.
Britain's empire was all about trade. We have coaling stations around the world. That was initially what it was all about. You got to have coaling stations everywhere, and then you want to get the trade through. And then what the British did is they trained barristers all over the world. What are barristers and lawyers? And local people, right? And so it lays the basis not on purpose, but in fact, law, where law to their own country's benefit. Anyway, so Britain has this non-continuous event, and after the war, it does not have the ability to hang on to it, particularly because nationalism, think about nationalism. Nationalism starts in the Napoleonic Wars. That's what Napoleon leverages, is the they en masse these armies, because French people feel nationalism is incredibly powerful. And nationalism has been spreading its way around the world ever since. Once you have nationalism, have fun hanging on to a non-continuous empire. The locals are going to fight and resist. Commercial advantages. they won't be commercial. Okay, in most cases, like came on towards empire in left and negotiated its way. Now Russia is a different event. It's all contiguous. Wherever that Red Army is, you can get onto it. If you look over time, usually Stalin builds and does quite well. But then you start looking in 67, all of a sudden rates not like Western, but and the compound. Fast forward to now, Russia stands living on Russia's entire economy, like I was lost all these territories, is less than Mexico. There's nothing wrong with Mexico, but the Russians have this idea of it. They don't.
Yeah. I think the compounding is a very important point because I think Tyler County is 1890 to basically the 20th century. They had been one year. U.S. per capita GDP would be towards $1,000.
Bingo. And this is to give a tangential comment. This is how sanctions work. People look at sanctions and go, oh, they don't work because you don't make whoever's annoying you change whatever they're doing. What they do is they suppress growth so that whoever's annoying you over time, you're stronger and they're weaker. And the example of the impact of sanctions is compare North and South Korea.
Right. Yeah.
It's powerful over several generations.
Right. Now, but to the question about why Russia is so well, in terms of we're too ended up with so much.
Tens of millions of people
But
die.
it's quite Stalin as well.
Exactly.
Right. The reason I asked for this is how it happened because of that. Did the failure of FDR towards the end of the war that contribute to how much land that the Soviet Union was able to accumulate?
Oh, well, there's a choice at the end of the war. So there was some talk about whether to invade up through the Balkans and try to put Western armies there. Okay, so let's put you back in time as a serviceman, and you look at it and go, do you want to lose your life by going up through the Balkans, or are we just going to call it a day? And also, by the way, Stalin is a land power with a huge army in place. He's been fighting an advantage. Do you really want to lose your life doing that? And you have